Okay, go for it.
With this bell, I welcome all of you to our Rotary E-Club of World Peace. I'm Barbara Gahn Mueller, your president. Delighted you're here. We have a wonderful speaker tonight. I have been waiting for this all day. Even though I'm busy, I still look forward to our evening meetings with our speakers. Last week we had Douglas Roach, and Douglas Roach said, he is the Honorable Douglas Roach, who was an ambassador to the UN, etc. And he said, optimism is in my DNA. I can always do something to advance the agenda for peace. We are the Rotary Club of World Peace for you new people who are joining us tonight. And he said, hope is a verb, not something you wait for, it's something you make happen. And I love those words. And he said there is a triple emergency now: climate, nuclear weapons, and COVID-19, and it's our transformation moment. And I think that's exactly where we are. And that's why I'm so delighted we're having David. I have two announcements tonight. One is our latest honorary member is, where is she? Raise your hand so we can all see you. There she is, Andrea Shields. We nominated her for our honorary member, and last night she had a unanimous approval, and we're so glad. Andrea has been on our meetings over and over and over again. It always adds so much. And she's on, let's see, you're on the Rotary group with who? You're on one of our special meetings. I'm thinking his name just slipped out of my brain.
Committee.
Huh?
What's your committee?
DEI, DEI.
Yes. Yes. All right. So welcome. And now I'd like you to all know Peggy Aseo. Peggy Aseo is our committee chair for donations, foundation grants, etc. And she is a fabulous person working directly with Rotary International. Peggy, would you like to give us a little update on how we're doing with our funding this year?
Sure. And I should give you all fair warning, we're going to be doing this about once a month, just to keep everybody on track. We have an annual fund goal that we set this year of $3,000. It's a pretty conservative goal, but reasonable. And I'm pleased to tell you, we are at 2,460 toward that goal. And we've given, as a club, $3,640 in contributions total this year. So and I did want to let you all know, we raised about $1,000 toward our $1,500 club goal for polio. This is a tough year for polio with COVID. So as you're thinking about your giving for the next few months, please keep polio in mind. It's matched 2-to-1 by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. We know it's going to be a tough year, and I ask you to consider that. We talked a lot last night about the need to remind everybody that you can give online very easily, and you can give through a recurring gift of $10, as little as $10. So if you can make a contribution to the annual fund this year, it's really, really important, helps us meet our goals. If you don't want to give it to the annual fund, and we have 15 members who already have, I encourage you to do that. But if you'd like to even give a second gift to polio, you can do it all online at rotary.org/donate. We'll be sending you a link and a little update in the upcoming newsletter. And if anybody ever has any questions about it, you know who to call. There you go.
Thank you.
Thank
Well,
you.
that was beautifully said, Peggy. Thank you. All right, y'all know we got to give a little bit more. $10 a month is what she's asking for. Or if you want to do more, that's great too. All right. Rudy Westervelt is a co-founder of our beautiful club. We started in 2016 for you new people. And we are just so delighted to welcome all of you. Rudy, do you want to do roll call today? You think we have time?
Yeah, let's do it real quickly if I can here.
Okay.
We'll
Thank you, Rudy.
jump through here and kind of recognize everybody. Ann Frisch is on. Ann, good to see you. She's an honorary member and is a real proponent to eliminate nuclear weapons on the planet here. Carol, great to see you. Dee is on. He's a past district governor. Dee, great to see you. Brian Berman is on from Ojai. Marcia, how is everything with you?
Good.
Everything's going great. David Wick is our club president-elect up in Ashland. Sala Sweet is honorary member up and joins us from Seattle, and she's on every week with us here. Andrea, you just met Andrea. She likes to be up with us in the mountains here occasionally. And come on up. We're going to get some snow here on Friday, so you can shovel my driveway. I really don't have a driveway, but that's okay. It's Anya.
I was thinking you could shovel mine.
Oh, that might be a good one. Anya, how are you? And Anya is going to help us do some Russian interpretations here or translations for us, because we have a couple clubs we're meeting with over in Russia, so that's great. Dave, I'll introduce David here in a moment. Dennis, good to see you over in Connecticut. Emmanuel, you heard about Emmanuel. He's our first president. He's circling the world here in this planetary mission, I think. You heard from Peggy. Karen is on next to me here. She's got the lake behind her. And Bob, he's from Cathedral City. Bob, good to see you tonight. Al Jubis is joining us from Portland. Al, great to see you. Alma, great to see you tonight. Tony's one of our newer members. Tony, great to see you.
Thank you.
Warren's on. Looking good there. We got a Canadian with us here, Richard. And it's probably cold up there. That's why he's growing his beard a little bit. And Arnold is too, but he's down here in our area. And Tom, good to see you tonight. Mary Jo, how are you?
Fine, things.
And keep going along the line here. Make sure they're missing somebody. Connie, good to see you tonight. Mark is joining us from sunny Hawaii, I think. So keeping it down there. Terry, how are you tonight? Lisa, great to see you.
You ready?
Keeping us peaceful in the police departments. Tim, haven't seen you since last night, so keeping Iowa straight. John, good to see you. Hopefully things are okay out in Colorado. Sharon, great to see you tonight. She's our a connection. She's just done incredible work. We in our club honored her with a Lifetime Achievement Award not too long ago. Anastasia, great to have you join us tonight. And Sharon, thank you for inviting her. And so welcome to our club tonight. Nadine.
Thanks a lot.
Yeah, that's super. Nadine, great to see you. And Nadine started a group online with Rotary, Rotarians Against Racism. Is that correct, Nadine?
That's right. Thank you, Rudy. Thanks for the welcome.
And we've got several members that are part of that. So if you want to join Nadine on that and get a hold of me or get a hold of Dennis Wong, and we'll make sure you get connected with this group. So thank you for your work you're doing, Nadine, and we support your efforts wholeheartedly.
Thank you.
Adam, great to see you tonight. It was interesting to see Oxfam came out with a statement recently after the 6th. So great to see that message out there. Danielle, good to see you. Where are you joining us from, Danielle?
Hi, it's Danielle. I'm working with David Kennedy at the National Network for Safe Communities. He invited me on as a courtesy since he knows that I have a long connection with Rotary as well, actually going back to my first RILA in high school.
Oh, great.
Different Rotary clubs across the country most of my life.
Well, Danielle, please join us any Tuesday night. And or our club permanently. That'd be even better. So Arthur, great to see you. And Arthur, when is your podcast with the Rotary International President-elect?
A week from tomorrow. It'll be at 10 o'clock in the morning, every Wednesday, 10 o'clock in the morning. So tomorrow we have Glenn Martin talking about the Earth Constitution, people all over the world coming together to create a constitution for our planet. And then Shekar the following week. So I put in the chat, you just go to peoplepoweredplanet.com and scroll down. It's free to, I hope you'll all join us tomorrow and every Wednesday, and especially for Shekar. Get word out to your friends because that's going to be a remarkable opportunity. And thank you, Rudy, for your help with that. Rudy's been on the podcast, Barbara has, and a number of you've been on. Richard's been on it, and a lot of wonderful guests. Ford Roosevelt.
You're
So
doing a good job,
Yes,
Arnold.
he is.
Thank
That's
you.
super. Bill, great
come
to
watch
see
the
you tonight.
replays. Thank you.
Hi, Bill. Kanadi, how are you?
Good, thank you.
Oops.
Oops, that's okay.
Is that for me or somebody else?
I think you.
Okay. Denver is doing well.
That's good. Yep. Stay a mile high.
Yeah.
Chantel, good to see you tonight.
Boulder.
How's your little one doing?
Good. She's napping right now, so it's going
Oh.
to be an interesting night.
Okay, we'll be quiet so you don't wake her up. Catherine from Down Under. The inauguration is already over in Australia, I think, but that's okay. Marilyn, great to see you tonight. And Carl, how are you?
Carl makes me hungry.
Yeah, he's zooming. He's got Zoom for breakfast cereal, it looks like.
Uh-huh.
And I mentioned Karen, she's our newest member here. And she's from down in San Diego.
Oh, good.
Close to me.
And Mike Corbin's on here as his wife, I think. So.
Oh, my daughter's computer.
Oh, your daughter's computer. Okay.
Yeah, mine's down. So still glad to be able to make it in.
Now, somebody mentioned here that somebody was on tonight or had a family member with cancer, and so our thoughts and prayers are with you. Carl, was that you?
Carl, yeah.
And so our thoughts and prayers are with you, and so this is great. A great group tonight with us here. Make sure there's no.
Andrea, it was Dennis Wong's group that you're on. That's what I was trying to remember. Dennis Wong, I see you there. You're doing a great job with your committee.
That's
Rudy,
Great people on the committee.
Yeah, you got a great way bringing people together. And I attended one of your meetings, and I love the dialogue. You don't just come on and say, now we're going to do this, but you bring it from us. Thank you.
And all the folks that are visitors on here who aren't in Rotary, please consider coming back Tuesday nights and joining our club. Got a great group here that's really focused on creating peace in the world and peace in our country and our communities and globally here. So it's a great connection, and we have a great group here and a good time. And so tonight, I'd like to introduce our program here. And our speaker tonight, David Kennedy, is a professor of criminal justice at John Jay College, Criminal Justice in New York City. He's the founder and director of the National Network for Safe Communities at John Jay, and they support cities in developing strategies to reduce violence, minimize arrest, incarceration, enhance police legitimacy, and strengthen relationships between law enforcement and communities. And I think, Lisa, that kind of fits in with you. So you probably need to connect both of you together here. He was a principal in the Boston Gun Project back in the mid-90s, pioneered action for public safety and Operation Cease Fire and homicide prevention, and really is focused deterrence on intervention to work on these areas. He's focused on group and gang violence, intimate partner violence, street drug markets, prison safety, and many other public safety issues. And he's worked in a variety of cities across the United States. And he's worked with the Treasury Department's Youth Crime Gun Interjection Initiative and Department of Justice's Strategic Approaches to Community Safety Initiative, and many other things here. He's won 2 Ford Foundation initiatives on government awards, 2 Weber CV awards in International Association with Chiefs of Police, and the 2011 Hatfield Scholar Award for Public Interest. He is an author. He said he had 2 1/3 books or 2 2/3 books here. Don't Shoot, One Man, A Street Fellowship, and In Violence, Inner City America, Deterrence and Crime Prevention, Reconsidering the Prospect of Sanction. And he's a co-author of Beyond 9/11, A New Era for Policing. And he's going to help us take a look at what he's doing out in the cities, and perhaps there's areas that we can collaborate on to make our communities safer across the United States. I know he has an initiative going in Chicago, and Peggy, you're from Evanston, and we know there's other groups up there working as well. And so without further ado, David, take it away. And I hope he's still here. David?
Yes, still here. So thanks, Rudy. Thanks everybody, both for most immediately this invitation, but also for doing what you're doing, and pretty clearly being. I'll speak for myself and Daniil in our office. Really obsessive about these issues. So I get a certain sense here, and it's probably not too far off base to say that I'm here for the same reasons that you are. So I don't know you, I don't know your work, either collectively or individually, but you are here this evening. You're from all over the world, which I didn't realize was going to be part of the fabric, Rudy, when we started our correspondence. And you're here because for whatever reason you care desperately about, and you probably finish this sentence in different ways, about peace, about nonviolence, about violence, about safety, about public safety, about security. Me too. So I am here in a very real way by accident. Every time I think about this, or I'm asked to explain it, I'm still a little bit surprised. I found myself in Boston, Massachusetts in the 1980s. I followed the wrong woman from college to Boston, which was itself a big mistake, but got me to a place where better things happen, I'm happy to say. And wanted to be a serious nonfiction writer. I was good at learning about things. I didn't feel like I was particularly good at anything else. I'd always thought it would be cool to write books. I needed to pay the rent, and the best thing that I could think of was to become an impoverished freelance writer, which is what I was doing. And I got a wonderful job at Harvard University. So I continued to do my magazine work and such in my spare time. But my day job was as a case writer at the Harvard School of Government. So the School of Government at Harvard is not a classically academic department. It's not a political science department, for example. It turns out people who want to work in politics and government and public policy. So it's a professional school. And like other professional schools, law schools, business schools, it does a lot of its teaching by the case method. And it had a small office of about half a dozen writers who were on call to the faculty to write the teaching cases that undergirded a lot of the curriculum. And it was a wonderful opportunity for somebody like me. You got time, you got access, you got these very interesting assignments. I wrote about state government and local government and national security and what the Reagan administration was thinking about when it installed Marines in the airport in Lebanon, and talked to CIA agents and traveled to Germany to interview the lawyers who were representing some of the terrorists who'd been hijacking airplanes and landing them in Germany. It was just fascinating. And Harvard has all sorts of problems, but when you call somebody and say, I'm from Harvard and I'd like to interview you, they say yes. So you have great access, and I was just having a wonderful time. on a trajectory I hoped that would end me, at the New Yorker or something like that. And in 1985, I was asked by a group of faculty at the school to start doing some case writing in policing. So there was a group there that was convinced that American policing was, as they put it, bankrupt as a strategic model. They were interested in doing better. They wanted somebody out looking at what was going on in the profession. And they tapped me to do some of this work. And I had no more substantive interest in that than I did in anything else I'd been working on. Writers are, to be polite about it, serial monogamists. They invest themselves heavily in what they're doing, and then they leave it behind and they move on. And I had no more interest in this than that. And I went out into what turned out to be Black and brown neighborhoods all over the United States. And what I saw was unspeakably awful. So this was 1985. It was the beginning of the American crack epidemic. On the East Coast, I was reading in the Boston Globe and the New York Times about this new drug called crack that had surfaced in California. And the speculation was, will we see it here? In a lot of the country, starting in Southern California, it was already a forest fire. And what it was doing in the communities that had been consumed by the crack epidemic was literally unimaginable to somebody like me. There's a happy fiction in quote progressive unquote circles these days that crack was not a big deal, that it was all a moral panic, and it was cool and hip when rich white folks in Hollywood snorted powder coke, but it was super predators when young Black kids did it. And none of that was true, and it was never that bad. And everything we said about how awful it was wrong, and it spurred the war on drugs and mass incarceration, and that all of that has gotten us where we are now with the appalling harms and excesses of criminal justice. And everything that people say about how wrong-headed and toxic our responses were is right. The reasoning backward to say, and the issue on the ground was never important, is as dead wrong as it can possibly be. And anybody who was in those neighborhoods, who lived in them or policed them or did public health in them, knows that what the crack epidemic did to poor Black neighborhoods all over the country was devastating beyond our capacity to describe it. And I found myself in the midst of neighborhoods where there were street shrines to the dead on the corners and in the middle of the blocks, where little groups of armed young men had taken over public spaces, where people were afraid to come out of their houses, where the police were afraid to get out of their cars, where gunshots were routine, literally where walking down the street, the apartment buildings and the houses were pockmarked by bullet holes. I remember walking Anacostia, DC, which is, you can practically hold your breath and walk to Anacostia from the White House. And it looked like a movie of a World War II, scene from Stalingrad, with people in wheelchairs and walkers, and it is literally impossible to get anybody who wasn't there to get it. And because of the work I was doing, I was with the very best people, because this is the Harvard team that had mobilized me, who were reinventing policing. This was the beginning of community policing, who were doing the very best criminal justice thinking with leading light mayors and city managers from all over the country, the top people from the FBI and DEA and the Justice Department. And I did this for 10 years and nothing was getting better. So crack really hit the country in the early 1980s. By the late 1980s, it was from the West Coast to the East Coast. I was in Boston, and our homicide crisis begins in 1988. And I was, by happenstance, embedded with the people whose job it was to solve this problem. And they weren't doing it, and nothing, because I was, lucky enough to be part of these conversations, nothing that anybody was talking about was going to make any difference. And I had one foot in these rarefied circles and one foot in the neighborhoods. And if you knew what was going on the ground, nothing that anybody was talking about in criminal justice or treatment on demand or drug interdiction or none of it was going to matter. And it wasn't mattering. People were dying and dying and dying and dying and dying. And it was, you didn't have to be any kind of smart to see this. White people were not living like this. The harm was entirely in Black and brown neighborhoods, particularly in American Black neighborhoods. For all practical purposes, everybody who was getting killed was Black and brown. And it was not a secret. It was all obvious. It was in plain sight. The stats were there. The stories were on the news every night, and nobody was fixing it. So something had to happen. And in 1995, two junior colleagues and I from the Kennedy School went to the Boston Police Department, kind of informed by these new ideas in policing, community policing and problem-oriented policing, and set up with them to try to figure out what was happening and what could be done about it. And I see Lisa Broderick is with us. I know a little bit, Lisa, about Police to Peace. I know you're active in Portland. The problem-oriented policing framework simply says, when what you're doing isn't working, step back, try to figure out what the issue is, and then try to come up with some kind of sensible response to it. And one not bounded by the traditional police practices, but just try to figure out something that would work. So we set up with a team of Boston police officers and frontline prosecutors and street outreach workers and community activists. Our first meeting with that group was in January of 1995. And before we walked out of the room that day, those people who were working on this on the front lines had given us, the three of us from the Kennedy School, an understanding of what was going on, that in 10 years of this work and reading all of the scholarship, nobody else understood what was happening and nobody else knew how to act in the way that those frontline folks did. And what they knew and what they taught us was what everybody thought was true about the violence was wrong. It was, for example, embedded in the crack epidemic and the crack markets, but it had almost nothing to do with making money. It was not about the markets. It was not about corners or turf. They said, we know the dead. We know who killed them. They are members of these crack era, they called gangs, but little crack crews in Boston that had come with the crack epidemic. They are armed, they're nervous, they're traumatized, they're at risk. Having large numbers of groups of young men who are armed and traumatized and nervous and vulnerable is a bad thing. So little social frictions turn into violence. It can be a girl, it can be disrespect, it can be, a drug debt or a bad used car or something like that. But those disputes then become embedded in the groups and it turns into classical vendetta. My group against your group can go on for years and years and years. People today won't even know what started it, but they know that we have enemies. It's Hatfield and McCoy, it's Shakespeare, it's Montague and Capulet. So there aren't very many of these groups. There aren't very many who are truly active in them. We know who they are to the point that we can often almost predict who's going to get shot. And none of our system responses to this are working at all. But sometimes we can do something that will make it a lot better. And what we do when something gets particularly out of hand is we go to that group, we say, we know who you are, we know what you're doing, you are the most violent group in Boston right now. We can't stop all of this all the time, but we're going to stop you. And because you have made yourself exceptional, you are going to be our special project for the next little while. You're doing all kinds of crimes, you're selling drugs, you're violating your probation and parole, you've got unregistered cars, you're carrying guns, you're carrying knives. So because of the shooting, we are going to pay comprehensive attention to every legal vulnerability of everybody in the group. And if you want this special attention to stop, because we are going to make your lives miserable, put your guns down, stop the shooting. And over again, they had done this, and before too very long, the group got it and they stopped. And while they put this law enforcement pressure on, they moved in the street outreach workers, they had activist Black clergy that were doing mediation and getting people into social services. They moved in jobs programs, they worked with families. But this package turned out to be consistently effective. So it took only a couple of months to understand what they already knew, which was this concentration of violence, this core group dynamic, which meant it wasn't about any individual gang member, it was about the groups and the groups. And this interesting way of making direct contact, focusing on the violence and changing this group behavior. We built that up together into what became called Operation Ceasefire in Boston, which was a way of systematically communicating with those groups, delivering these core messages. Your community wants you to stop. We want you to live. We want to help you. The violence is intolerable. It will no longer go forward. And if it continues, here's what's going to happen. And we're going to tell you ahead of time. And we had 2 meetings with group members in Boston. And within 3 months of beginning this, the shooting in Boston had palpably, dramatically reduced. And the formal evaluation over 2.5 years saw that violence had gone down in the city, citywide by half. Youth homicide had gone down by 2/3. The city kept this going for 5 years, and over those 5 years saw a 70% reduction in homicide citywide. They called it the Boston Miracle, which it wasn't. It was just ordinary people doing very serious work. Those fundamentals, what they taught us about the violence, have turned out to be true overwhelmingly around the most serious public safety issues. So that embeddedness of community violence in groups has turned out to be true in every city in the United States where anybody has done this research. Those groups will be there. They will be connected with the violence. Everybody in those groups will represent right around 0.5% of the city. They will be connected with 50 to 75% of all homicide. And these group dynamics around vendetta and retaliation and respect and disrespect, not money, will be at the core of what's going on. We figured out a version of this to shut down those crack era drug markets. And in an open air drug market that had been tearing a particular neighborhood apart for 30 years at that point, there would be, from 10 to 30 frontline dealers who were driving the market, bringing the outside dealers in at the core of the engine that was destroying that community. And if you engage them in the same way, you could make the drug market go away essentially overnight. Daniil is part of a team at the National Network that is particularly focused on gender-based violence. If we look at the most serious intimate partner violence, mostly men, mostly who abuse women, and we look at the men who kill and most grievously injure their victims, we now find that, so this is criminology stats, but out of a population of 100,000 people, at any given time, there will be perhaps 10 or 20 of those most violent offenders. They stand out. They are not just like their male neighbor living next to them. They have the same basic pattern of broad-based chronic offending. And if you go to frontline practitioners and shelter providers and those sorts of people and say, who are the most dangerous men in your community, they will tell you their names because they are different and they stand out. This turns out to be, we now think, a fundamental kind of piece of natural science about the most serious public safety issues. Outside of settings like civil war and insurrection, the worst things are done by very small numbers of exceptional people. And I spent a time in sort of the middle of my work where I thought that wasn't true, that we would look at things like homicide in Boston. It clearly was true, but we look at other crimes and it's clearly not true. They're much more broad-based than that. And I used to think, look at speeding. Everybody speeds. And then, reality caught up with me. And, I do what I'm about to do with U.S. attorneys and officers of the court. And I will say to them, please, ladies and gentlemen, raise your hand if you speed when you drive, right? And everybody raises their hand because everybody speeds. And I say to them, you are officers of the court, you're all serial recidivists, and they don't like that very much. But we speed with civility. So we are breaking the law, but we don't want to hurt ourselves and the people in our cars. We don't want to hurt the people on the highways next to us. We're maybe 5 and 10 and 15 miles an hour over the speed limit. We don't tailgate. We don't weave through traffic. We slow down when it rains and it snows. And as we break the law, there are a few people on the highway who are not civil. They're 40 miles an hour over and they tailgate and they weave through traffic and they don't slow down when it rains and it snows. And the rest of us criminals don't like them, right? We don't want them in our midst. So crime and law is one thing. Serious threats to public safety and serious threats to the community fabric, that's different. And it turns out that those serious threats to public safety and to families and relationships and communities are done, and I will say to nations, because we're dealing with that right now. the people who instigate and make those things happen are few, statistically speaking, and they are different than everybody else. And this basic framework of recognizing that, naming that as a problem, and mapping onto it a fundamental intervention framework that combines direct engagement with those high-rate, high-risk people, what we call the moral voice of the community, people that they respect, saying to them, we care about you, but what you're doing is wrong and it has to stop and there's no excuse for it, what scholars call informal social control, to recognize whatever may be going on in their lives that can be addressed, and offering what the National Network calls support and outreach to try to support them and stabilize them in any way possible. And to put people on prior notice that certain acts will bring formal consequences, and then arranging things so that that will in fact happen. So to say, for example, to a city full of violent groups, we can't and we don't want to do law enforcement on all of you, but we're telling you on Monday that the first group that shoots somebody is going to get this kind of attention. And when that shot is fired on Thursday, that group gets that attention. Means that on Friday, you can say to all of the groups in the city, we said it, we meant it, the clock's ticking again. The first group that shoots somebody is going to get this kind of attention. And you have created certainty for that act without locking up everybody in the city. And then particularly where community violence and a lot of dynamics are concerned, recognizing that the issue is not rooted in individuals, it's rooted in groups and group dynamics. And that if we're going to address that, we need to engage with the group and not with the individuals as individuals. That's turned out to be an approach that is adaptable to a wide range of issues. And the National Network, where Daniil and I work, are kind of an action research shop that takes on these issues, figures out these strategic approaches, and works with cities, states, countries to put these in place. I heard during the introductions that there's somebody on from Australia. The Australian Institute of Criminology looked at the domestic violence intervention that Daniil's part of at John Jay, and issued a really, really good report last year saying, we see essentially the same fundamental intimate partner violence dynamics here in Australia. We're going to try this here. And it looks like that may be coming. So let me say a couple of other things and then wrap up. And I'm going to ask Daniil if she wants to contribute anything here, and then we'll go to whatever kind of conversation you want to have. I began by saying that white people don't live like this. And overwhelmingly, were these most harmful and most damaging violence and public safety issues, particularly at the community level, are concerned. In the United States, that is true. This is not equitable. It is not evenly socially distributed. Young Black men in the communities where we work die at a rate 600 times that of their white peers in the neighborhood next door. It is obscene. It is a fundamental matter of racial injustice. Again, this is not a secret. This has been true in the United States forever. We act as if it's normal, and it is normal because that's the way we spend our days. It is not okay. And when one works in and with these neighborhoods, after the violence, the next thing that is most obvious is that the state and the police as agents of the state in these communities have been toxic literally before there was a United States and for the entire history of the United States. these days people talk about mass incarceration and that particular awful outcome, but the law was used to support and protect transportation before there was a United States. Racial inequity is literally a part of the United States Constitution. Slavery and post-Reconstruction and Jim Crow and the Black Codes and the war on drugs and the war on crime and assaults on civil rights were all done under color of law with the police as agents. And a root cause of the violence is that history and the illegitimacy of the police in the lives of these communities in a very direct way. You know, if somebody is at risk, if they know that somebody's trying to hurt them, they can call the police and ask for and get help and work with the system, or they can get a gun and protect themselves. And because of the estrangement of police from of communities from police in these communities, door number 2 is the option that's taken far too often. So a major part of our work is recognizing that history and that estrangement drives violence. It is not adjacent. It is not an accident. It is not true that draconian bad law enforcement is the way to produce public safety. In a very real way, draconian bad law enforcement is why we have these problems in these communities. It is causal. And so a big part of our work is recognizing that and forging relationships with communities and police that are built on that recognition, partly by changing practice, because if you're dealing with the most dangerous in a respectful way, you don't have to do zero tolerance and stop and frisk and treat whole communities as criminal, and partly by, and I'm getting a signal my computer is dying and I'm realizing I'm not plugged in properly, so I'm going to fix that while we're talking. You will lose my picture here, but you will not lose me. But also by expressly focusing on frank reconciliation engagements. And a big part of our focus at the National Network right now is frank, deliberate police community reconciliation built on the inspiration of things like post-apartheid reconciliation in South Africa and conflict regimes and in those sorts of contexts. So let me stop there. I continue to have this tech problem, which I will figure out how to fix. But Daniil, let me give this to you. Folks, if I disappear momentarily, I will be back directly, and I apologize for this. But Daniil, over to you.
Sure. And I'll keep things brief so we can get to some questions. But I also work very closely as a field advisor on the reconciliation portfolio. And Bill Timpson in the chat just mentioned his experiences in Northern Ireland. And absolutely, we drew on a lot of the transitional justice insights from peace processes after the Troubles and in several post-conflict states. Taking from those experiences was essential for informing our understanding about the importance of acknowledging harm and the impact to the institutional harm in the form of such things as David mentioned, from slavery to the Black Codes to the war on drugs. This amalgamation of institutional harm has a clear impact on communities, has a direct, as he said, causal relationship to the high levels of violence that we see. So this reconciliation piece is incredibly important for practical reasons, certainly when we talk about the importance of reducing violence and how best to do so. It's not as easy to talk about the future or even the present without acknowledging what happened in the past. But also the component of reconciliation in Northern Ireland and internationally, you may hear it called truth and reconciliation, right? And so I mentioned to you guys have a little Rotary background or a lot. So you think of the four-way test, right? And the very, very first question, is it the truth? In order for us to be able to come together to understand what transpired, to understand what needs to be done to correct that, and to understand how best that police departments and community members can work with each other to address these harms and to build a better future, we have to start with the truth. So the reconciliation portfolio is something that is incredibly important on its own as a standalone effort, but also in many ways informs all of the violence prevention strategies that we do at the National Network. Because of the simple principle of recognizing where past approaches have caused harm and where institutions, and mind you, we're not saying that in every situation, people representing these institutions have gone out to disrupt and tear at communities. In some cases, that was the explicit intent with things like slavery and Jim Crow. But oftentimes within these institutions, people are trying to do their job. You know, my previous life as a management consultant, and what I often found is that people want to just do their job. Oftentimes they're hampered by the systems and processes that are in place and that often continue to generate racial inequities and gender inequities. And because of the way that these institutions were designed, even when somebody gets on each day, puts on their uniform and goes out there to try to protect and serve their community, they may inadvertently be perpetuating some of the same harm that those communities then look at to decide that they don't want to work with the police department. So it's important for us to get together to recognize the truth of what happened and to develop a plan together about how to work forward to address that past harm and to build a better future together. And we see that as core to our violence prevention efforts in the sense of, you know, taking an explicit break from past practices, recognizing where they cause harm and where we want to change, and engaging communities. You know, we firmly believe that public safety is not something that should be done to communities, but rather should be done with. And a lot of these people in the communities where David mentioned, where he started out his career, were deliberately excluded from decision-making power. And it's important to bring them back in a meaningful way. So I'll pause there to get back over to David, who I hope has a power cord, and look forward to the question.
So I'm live again, and yep, Danielle, exactly what Danielle said. Thanks for that. And Rudy, over to you.
Yeah, great. Appreciate that. I'm not sure whether I was depressed or enlightened. So probably a combination. We still have work to do, and I appreciate the fact that you were in the trenches for all this time and were able to understand what was going on and build around that and develop some new strategies on how to intervene and to protect our communities. And so I thank you for that. And certainly the same way is true with partner violence, family violence, that sort of thing that you're working on. I guess I wanted to understand you've gone into many cities, and is that an invite from a mayor, from who invites you to come into a city to assist them?
There's no particular answer to that. So it will be mayors, it will be law enforcement leadership, it will be community folks. Sometimes it's organized community interests. Sometimes it's somebody, I think, like you and like us, who just can't stand it and has no particular portfolio, but is doing their due diligence and trying to figure out what will work and how to make it happen. There's increasingly recognition at the state level in the United States, that these approaches are real and they work, and they should get state executive level attention. So New York, where Daniil and I are, Connecticut, Ohio, North Carolina, California have all made commitments to this approach at the state level, which means, you know, where needed in cities around their state. Community foundations will often say, you know, we're going to marshal our resources and support this kind of thing. Some of it's come from academics, from scholars. So there are a lot of ways in.
That's good. Lisa Broderick, you're back on here.
I am.
You have some comments or questions, or?
Well, I missed a bit of it because I was on with the city, but David, I have followed your work and I'm so thrilled to meet you on this Zoom. We're very like-minded. I'm one of those people who just couldn't take it anymore. And so Police to Peace was founded to reinvigorate community policing using Peace Officer, which seems silly to a police scholar, but turned out to be a super novel idea. And in this era where we really need to revitalize policing and community policing, it's something that has a head of steam on it.
Yeah.
So we're hopeful that we can continue to do our work around the country. And it's such an honor to meet you.
So we should connect after this. I've been at this long enough now that my work with the Portland Police Bureau goes back to Penny Harrington, if you can believe that. Yeah, wow, exactly. I'm really old now. That's, you didn't have to say that out loud.
Well, they've had chiefs, sorry.
They've had a lot of chiefs, yeah. There probably aren't a lot of people in Portland who even know this, but the Janet Reno Justice Department looked at the Boston work and did a very purposeful replication, which went by this awful name, the Strategic Approaches to Community Safety Initiative, which nobody had tried to pronounce until it was decided upon. So they didn't realize that calling something sexy was a really bad idea. And Portland was one of those initial replication sites, which meant that they ended up doing some of the earliest adaptation of focused deterrence, which was very effective in Portland. And then, of course, people forgot all about it and moved on. But we should talk.
I'll put put my email in chat.
Good.
And yours as well.
Good.
Thank you. Thank you
That'd be
so
great.
much.
That'd be great. Al, did you have any comments or questions? Al's working on with Portland. He's in the Portland Rotary Club, and they're working on a community initiative up in that city.
No, but it sounds like Lisa, who we're very excited about her work, and you're right, the Portland's been under DOJ for a long time and has forgotten a lot what they learned, but we are in contact, and there's a very large, there's 60 Rotarians, some on this call, that are working on social justice, racial justice, and police reform. And we're contemplating with Lisa's suggestion actually, to have a I-5 corridor, multi-state, multi-rotary district initiative from Southern Oregon to Seattle to do this work together. And a lot of it has to do with building the pillars of positive peace, but also reforming police departments. So
Thank you, Al.
excited about all this, yeah. But Lisa's the expert that we've been talking to.
You know, it's interesting because
that was David here.
Al and you and Lisa had an organic erosion that made this all possible, because you didn't come up with this solution that you were going to just do it. It happened, and you had that organic way of handling it, and you were direct, and it was direct engagement, which I love. And then you got the communities involved, and it's almost like when you give somebody attention, things happen. And I think that's what was happening. Am I right, David?
So I'm going to politely and respectfully disagree.
Good. I want to hear why.
And you certainly won't get anywhere without that attention and engagement. But it's really a pernicious myth that has kind of taken over the politics and ideology of violence prevention and safety and community safety, that simply getting people together and respecting their perspectives and experience and identities will produce good results, because it doesn't. And public safety is the only important area of public policy where people who have power and privilege and are often elected to and appointed to positions of responsibility and have the time and the resources and the authorization to do important public work completely abrogate those responsibilities and say, we're just going to listen to the community. The community knows how to solve its own problems. We're going to do what the community says. We don't do that with COVID. We don't say science and virology and teaching hospitals and medicine doesn't matter. We're just going to listen to the hardest hit communities. It's their problem, and we've got all the money and power, but we're just going to wait for them to tell us what to do. It is a gross abrogation of real responsibility. And what happens in practice is that people with all of those advantages turn to people who are broke, working 2 and 3 jobs, raising families under all the pressures that the outside have created in their communities. And we say to them, you're responsible here. We know that you know what to do. And then we sit back and let this horror show continue. So, no, again, with respect, just engagement and the right people in the room does not cut it.
Good for you.
There needs to be science here. There needs to be scholarship. There needs to be seriousness. There needs to be professionalism. Part of that has to include a culture that does not permit those responsible parties and institutions to let this go on generation after generation as if that's okay, and continuing to get paid and run their organizations and letting people die. So the most fundamental failure here is an institutional failure. And if we don't recognize that and recognize that our politics and democracy have produced this and sustained it, and if we don't recognize that the way to deal with that is not by sidestepping our institutions and democracy, but by goddamn fixing them, then this will not get better in the way that it ought to.
All I can say is thank you. Thank you. Thank you for pointing that out, because that's exactly what we needed to hear, and that's why we invited you to be here. Dave, do you want to ask any more questions? Our time is up. Rudy, what would you like to do?
I think anybody that wants to stay on for a while, if David can stay on, that'd be great. If anybody needs to leave because of the hour, that's fine too. We'll see you next week. But this is interesting discussion and an important discussion. And so anybody that can hang on with us, please do. And Daniil, you cited the 4-way test there. Are you in Rotary?
Yes, so I've been connected since I did RILA in high school. So I've been with the Rotaract Club Universities, with the Chicago Metropolitan Club, no, Chicago Cosmopolitan Club for a few years. And then, so now I'm in New York. So I've been working with the Harlem Rotary Club and the Rotary Metro of New York City.
Yeah, cool. Well, stay connected with us. And and David, are you in a Rotary?
I am not. No.
Well, you should be a member of our club then. So
Daniel, do you know Bosa Rivers at Harlem? Daniela? Hello?
Yes, who was it in Harlem?
Bosa Rivers. Who runs everything in Harlem? The Harlem Youth Program, the theaters, everything. I don't know. He'd make a great Rotarian. He's been very involved in the Peacemaker Corps and our peace program for years. Bosa Rivers is very famous.
Can you send his name in the chat and I'll connect with the member?
Sure, I'd love to introduce you since you're in Harlem. And he's been so supportive of
go ahead and put that in the chat if you would. Hey, Dennis, did you have a question for David?
Oh, I
You have some comments there. Unmute
Yes.
yourself, Dennis. Go ahead.
You know, well, first of all, I think we know what the problem is. But I think, David, if you had a magic wand, what would you do?
I honestly think that part of what I try to make my own discipline and what I want people who do this work to kind of internalize is that there are no magic wands. And one way we've come at these issues has been to say, we've got systems that are constructed to do this work. The systems are not producing good results. So obviously to fix the issues, we need to fix the systems. And then you're in what turns out to be this sort of endless slog to fix policing, to fix prosecution, to fix corrections, to fix departments of public health, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And one has been what's really the functional equivalent of let's wave a magic wand. And I was terrifically encouraged by the policing protests of the last year, because it meant that lots and lots of people, and really for the first time, lots of white folks, were saying the way policing is functioning is intolerable and we won't have it anymore. And that itself does not say, and here's how we're going to do better, right? So those are separable questions. And the New York Times ran an interview with a Black Lives Matter activist. And it was part of a series about how the protest movement wanted to do a new kind of public safety. And they interviewed 5 or 6 individuals. One of them was this particular activist. And their conversation with her was about domestic violence. And the headline was how we are going to address domestic violence without the police. And I and the office are passionate about domestic violence, so this is where I turned first. And the interviewer said to this activist, so how is this going to work? And she said, well, first you need to understand that in the world that I want to live in, everybody will know each other and everybody will be supportive. And so if you're having a problem with your abusive partner, the people who live next to you, the people on your apartments, the people on your street, they'll know about it and they will be able to help you. And I thought, well, that's a terrific vision. And somewhat later on in the interview, he asked her, but the country's awash with guns. How are we going to address this with all the guns? And her response was, oh, well, we just need to get rid of the guns. So on the one hand, we've taken on these endless attempts to fix the systems. On the other, we have these sort of pinch of fairy dust solutions, which basically say, if we lived in a different world, we wouldn't have these issues. Neither one of them produce progress. And what the National Network does, and what has really driven a lot of the advance in this area, is not doing either one of those things, but taking on particular substantive public safety problems and crafting particular solutions to them. And that's not nearly as romantic or as sort of ideologically satisfying as either of the other things, but it has the advantage of actually working. And so that's really what the National Network is about. We are working to produce a practice of public safety.
And something I could add there as well, being in the field, I have the privilege of connecting directly with law enforcement, with advocates, with community leaders. And the beauty and the value of this work, from the violence prevention and especially the reconciliation work, is in the process of doing. It's the hard work, it's the inner turmoil that comes where a police chief gets up there in front of a room of people with their arms folded, leaning back, and says, I take responsibility for what people who wore this badge have done to your community and are continuing to do, and I commit to changing. There's no easy way, there's no magic way to get somebody to take that step of personal growth and to recognize the institutional implications. There's no shortcut to the listening sessions that start out perhaps a bit testy, but really where you just come to see people embracing each other as people, seeing beyond the uniform or beyond the, any sort of connection in the community, but just to connect empathetically and, on a basis of trust and understanding. So the beauty really of this is that hard work and is each step. I think the only thing I could hope for is the commitment for people to want to engage in this process. It's not easy, it isn't, but it's necessary and it's important that people are willing to do this.
And David and Danielle, if you look at the statistics, crime statistics, not just the US, but you look at in the UK and probably pretty much in at least Western European countries where we can get some of the stats on domestic violence and a variety of these crimes that go on out there, they're very similar to the US in all our developed countries. Do you see a reason for that, David? What, us human beings here, why is that way?
Yes, we're just violent.
So guns matter a great deal. Structured inequality matters a great deal. And sort of national cultures and narratives around things like honor and self-determination and self-protection and self-defense all matter a great deal. So I don't think I've got anything particularly smart to say about that other people aren't better at. But the usual narratives about economics especially only go so far. And when we came to understand the extent to which the violence that I was focused on when I was getting started in the 80s and 90s, how much of that was fundamentally a matter of retaliation and vendetta between groups driven by social norms. So to say it again, almost none of the violence was about money. It was driven by ideas such as if you're disrespected, you're nothing, and that puts you at risk socially and physically. And the only way to get your standing back is to do violence. That's honor code stuff, as is the enemy of my friend is my enemy, which drives the group engagements. Those are all honor code dynamics. And they've got nothing to do with race or drugs or crack or anything else. And people could not understand this. They still have a hard time. But I remember I used to say to my white friends, look, in this country, not that long ago, rich young white men of breeding and privilege in the American South got up, put on their clothes, got their dueling pistols, and went out into the woods and shot at each other by pre-arrangement, right? That's what dueling was.
Right.
And they didn't do it because they were drug dealers. They didn't do it because they were raised by a single mother. They didn't do it because they were poor. They did it because they lived in a social structure that said, if I don't do this, I'm nothing. And I will guarantee you that 97 out of 100 of those young men stood there in the morning wishing to be anywhere but there, doing anything but that, because that kind of violence is horrible and nobody who's not a psychopath likes it. And there aren't very many crazy people out there. When lots of people do crazy things, it's because they're embedded in some sort of social structure that facilitates that and makes it hard not to do it. And we pay much too little attention to that and much too much attention to economics when we try to understand this stuff.